On the last episode, I bought a 1995 Dodge Ram for $150. The truck was wrecked and parked about 10 years ago. We threw a Chinese 4-barrel intake and an Edelbrock carburetor on it, got the truck running, pulled the Plymouth into the shop, pulled the front clip off of the 55 Plymouth wagon, pulled the motor out of the station wagon, cleaned and pressure washed the engine bay, painted the firewall, and got the engine mocked up and sitting in place. On this episode, we're going to work out the fitment issue, fabricate motor mounts, fabricate a transmission mount, install the Ford 8.8 rear end, and throw the front clip on the old girl.
All right, so it's late at night. I'm gonna go ahead and part 2 of the Magnum swap. So I got the engine pulled back out. On the last episode, we were having problems with the motor mounts, the big giant truck motor mounts right here weren't gonna work. Wasn't gonna let me set the motor down into the truck or wagon. So Magnum mounts have a rear mount or a mid mount right here, and then the old LA have a mount right here. So what I did was I ordered motor mounts for a 72 Plymouth Fury. It's smaller, and it's gonna make it where I can sit it down into the car, and then I can mock up my bottom mount. I'll have to fabricate something. I got the oil pan removed because I'm going to have to install this fancy piece of material. It was the cheapest one they had, and because the old one has a rear sump, and then I'm gonna need to replace the oil pickup. And what you do is you need to order, if you're doing a 318 Magnum, you need to order a 360 LA oil pan, which is the front middle sump. That way we can clear the steering. And then the pickup is a Melling 72-S2. And that's all you need. I did remove one of the rod bearing caps, just the one that was easiest to get to. When I started up, it didn't knock. Even cold, first start in 10 years, it didn't knock. So I know we're fine. I'll go ahead and put a picture of it right here of what it looked like. It was okay. It's in decent shape. Couple, just some normal wear and tear. Looks normal for a 150,000 mile motor. I removed the oil pump. It's two bolts. Hit those, it comes down. This oil pickup unscrews, and then you screw the new one on. All right, so I have the engine mocked up as best as I can. Here's the biggest hurdle. That starter is literally right up against the steering. So what I had to do was I had to shift the motor over about an inch, and that made it where I'm about in between a quarter and an eighth probably, and I got like this much space in between the starter and the steering box. I got the front of the motor as low as I'm gonna get it. I don't know, probably about an inch off of the frame. And I have this mount welded in. I'll show you that here in a second. What I did was I took a piece of square tubing, and then I cut the frame off of that Dodge Ram. And then I just cut a hole in the square tubing, bolted the square tubing to the motor mount. You can see it sitting down on it right now. Got it welded and painted. You can see how much clearance we have in between the exhaust manifold and the control arm. Barely anything. That's probably going to be a problem. It's also tilted up a little bit, so the X axis, I guess, is tilted over, which should be fine either way. All right, so here is the passenger side mount. It's just a piece of square tubing, 2 flat plates. I basically bolted the square tubing on and then took 2 flat plates, set them next to each other, tacked it all together, took it off, fully welded it all the way around inside and out, and then I put a weld on this side and that side on the frame. The weld on this side looks really, really bad because I basically had to lay on my back and while sparks were flying on me. So now that we got the engine set, bolted in, I removed the engine hoist, so it's sitting on its own weight. We just need to do the transmission cross brace. This is the one that came off of the 95 Dodge. I bolted it up and it hangs way too low. Like once I get this car off of these stands, it's just gonna be almost touching the ground. So this is what I got. The rear of the transmission and the drive shaft need to be like within 3 degrees of each other, and they need to be parallel, which means if this is going down, they need to be parallel, which means they both need to be going at the same angle like that. So if your drive shaft's going like this, then your tail shaft's going like this, then if you look at your rear end, it should be at the same angle facing up. So this will be facing down at this angle, it'll be facing up at that angle, and then your drive shaft will do this kind of number right here. So 3.6 is where I'm gonna have to put it, because I'm hitting on some spots up there, mainly on this side, because I had to shift the engine over. I'm gonna go ahead and take that transmission brace and cut it all apart and try to figure out a low profile way to make this cross brace work. I know my weld looks really bad, but took a piece of square tubing and then a piece of L channel, welded the L channel on there, and then I have my original Dodge Ram trans mount, rubber mount on there. And I had to take the original setup and flip it upside down and cut it, because it was on a truck, so it was hanging like really low. It was like this low. Kind of flipped everything upside down, square tubing, and then I took the original transmission mount off of the 3-speed 6-cylinder setup, and this piece of square tubing fit right into it, so I kind of stole the idea from the body. On the body, I was like, oh, if I take like a body mount type deal, flip it upside down. So I cut the transmission mount into 2 pieces, 2 little small pieces, fully welded it all the way around. I might add a couple more braces, like from here to here, but that L metal is pretty thick. I actually cut that piece off. I have a scrap boat trailer. We're sitting at 2.6 degrees down, so our rear end, we'll work on that tomorrow. It's getting late, so since my rear end's going 2.6 down, I think my trans is going 2.6 down, my rear end will go like, I don't know, 2 up. Turns out the original rear end on this car is actually offset 1.5 inches, and the trans tunnel is offset. So what I did was I put the engine and transmission in dead perfect alignment straight with the frame. And the way that I did that was, since my engine is offset over like 1 inch and some change, I think it was like 1 5/8 inches, I measured from here to here. That's exactly 30 inches. So half of 30 is 15. And then in the middle of my pulley was like 1 5/8 inches or 3/4, something like that. Went over. Then I went to the middle of the car, right where the end of my trans shaft was, measured from side to side, and then I got the middle number and I just moved it, and then I went over 1 5/8 inches or whatever this was. This crank pulley is like, and the end of your transmission is a dead perfect straight line. It doesn't offset or anything like that. So if this is perfect in line and you have that perfect in line, your engine and transmission are dead perfect on the frame. And then I went ahead and lifted this side of the engine up a little bit more, because it kind of looked funny sitting. This doesn't really matter too much. I mean, obviously if it's like that, it does. But if you're a little offset, they're not gonna hurt anything. So what I did was, just to make it look better, I went ahead and lifted the side up a little bit more. That way we're a little more level. Tomorrow, I'm gonna go ahead and do the rear end.
All right, so I went ahead and dropped the drive shaft off at a drive shaft place, I guess is what it's called. For the time being, I went ahead and hooked up the linkage. The guy said it's gonna take about 2 or 3 days, so I wanna have everything done so I can just stick the drive shaft in and then I can fire it up and roll down the road. So this is what I got for our Prindle, park reverse neutral. Okay, so here's the original linkage for the 3-speed on the column. What I did was I went over to the Dodge Ram. I cut the linkage knuckle off of the steering shaft, and then I just kind of crappily welded it on there all the way around. That is not going anywhere. You could beat on that thing with a hammer. And the only brunt it's going to take is just from you sipping from park to drive to reverse, mainly. Unless we put it in the first and do a burnout. And then all of this down is all the original linkage from the 95 Dodge Ram. I got lucky, and basically this came over and would bolt to the side of the frame, and this was all wonky and crazy. So what I did was I cut it off, and there was this bracket which goes to our clutch from the old 3-speed transmission, and I took that bracket and I flipped it sideways and the bolt holes lined up. I got lucky, and then I went ahead and welded it all the way around, and this is super solid. That's not going anywhere. And then the shifter, so every time I drive one of these old cars, new cars, whatever, I always feel like the shifter lever is too low. It's like right up in your knees. So whenever I mocked it up, I went ahead and put the shifter higher. That way I got all this room. So right now it's in park, reverse, neutral, drive. So drive is right there. I got all the space in the world. Usually this would be park on like a normal car, and then you would have reverse, neutral, drop, and then drive would be like down here. Which like if I kept the bench seat in this thing and there was a passenger right here, freaking drive would be down here. What are the odds that their knee's gonna hit it and then bump it out of gears? Kind of wanted to, since it's a 3-speed, it lifts in and out. Kind of wanted to put some splines on there. That way in park it can't slip out of park. See how easy it pops out of park? If I put some splines on the actual steering column to where you can't move it until you lift it up, then go over, and then you have to lift it back down. The only thing left to do is hit it with some of that Rust-Oleum Hideaway spray. This stuff makes me look like I know what I'm doing. Okay, so now that the drive shaft is in, it's looking really good. Now we can talk about our pinion angle. Pinion is this, that's the angle of it. So on the front of the car, whenever I put my level box on it, drive shaft, I had an angle of about 2.8 to 3 degrees. It was facing this way, 2.8 to 3 degrees. On the pinion, when I set this on there, right on the flange, it was reading around the same, anywhere from like 2.6 to 3 degrees. The reason why I say between is because this level box is gem red. It's not a very good machine. It was kind of, I don't know, it just, every time I'd level it out and reset it, the numbers would change. So we got, from our drive shaft to our rear end, we have, you know, within a couple degrees of each other, a point within a couple points from each other. So now what we need to do is we need to get the angle of our drive shaft. So I take my little gauge-a-lator, put it on. I know this slab is straight because I built this shop. And then you click 0 out, so it's at 0. And you can see it's already moving to 1. So it's at 0, and we put it on top of the drive shaft. So our drive shaft is at 2 degrees. Now we take our numbers and we plug it into a calculator. Alright, so the website that I'm on is spicerparts.com, and we've entered the number of shafts. We have 1 shaft. Driving member is our transmission.
This is kind of confusing, but it slopes down, but it's not actually how it goes. It goes from the rear of the car forward. So we're actually not sloping down, we're actually sloping upward. So our driving member is up 2.8, drive shaft goes up 2.2, and then our pinion is around 2.8. So we need to be within 3 to 4 degrees of each other. So pretty much the way it works is take this number, subtract them. That'll give you your first U-joint operating number. Take these two numbers and subtract them, and that'll give you your rear end U-joint operating number. So angle of drive shaft. So we are 0.6 degrees. So let's take a look under the car and see what that drive shaft looks like. A slight bend, and then our rear is just a slight bend on that U-joint. You don't want these to be dead. You don't want your drive shaft to be dead straight. You want your U-joints to have a little bit of a bend. So if like they're both on the same plane, like your drive shaft's right, if your transmission's right here and your rear end's right here, you don't want the drive shaft to be perfectly straight, because your U-joints require at least a half of a degree. I'm gonna go ahead and throw the headers on. All right, so the headers are put on. Very, very nice. And I really, really wish I would have put these on before I mocked the engine up, because with the stock manifolds, I had probably like a 1/4 of an inch gap between the manifold and the control arm. Now that I have these shorties on it, I mean, I got freaking, I don't know, probably 1.5 to 2 inches of space. So I probably could have dropped this motor down more. Let me show you the driver's side. Very, very nice fit. A lot of clearance on the steering box. I mean, more than the manifolds. So next step, figure out how to mock this linkage up for the transmission kick down. I think it's called a TV cable. So what I did was I cut the bracket, cut all of the little pieces off, and then marked it, drilled my 2 holes for the carburetor, bolted it on, and then the piece where the cable connected, I mocked it up, clipped this on, and got it where I wanted it. And then once I had it where I wanted it, I just tack welded it and then tested it to make sure it was good. And you can see when you push the gas, the cable moves out. And I have it adjusted just enough to where it's just out, where it's barely starting to open, like it's about to open. So it should be adjusted properly. If I ever want to adjust it, I can actually just bend that arm backward. Like if it starts to get loose, I can just bend the arm backward. But this is all super solid. Threw a coat of paint on it. I find a belt without air conditioning, but I couldn't find a belt without power steering. So I'm gonna cut these lines and just connect them together for right now. So power steering, and I need to get all this wiring connected. So I need to wire the voltage regulator for the distributor, or the alternator, which is really easy. This is a 90s Dodge. It's the same as even back in the 70s. It's the same. You can use the same regulator. It's just 2-wire regulator. I'll show you guys that. And then ignition wiring, and then my starter wiring, and that's pretty much it. I can start putting it back together. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the wiring and get it all buttoned up, and I'll show you guys how I set it up. All right, so I got the wiring done. I was actually able to use the Chrysler green and blue. So this alternator has a power wire that goes to it, and then it has a green and blue wire, and that runs over to your voltage regulator. And it's just match the wires up. Green goes to green, blue goes to blue. And then the blue wire, I think, has a switch 12 volt. And I connected that to it right here. I got my plug wires on there. Those plug wires look really good. I got my coil on there. Coil's wired up. It's really slick. Firewall mounted at a little bit of an angle. Got a new line for the PCV valve. New line for the vacuum advance hooked up right here. And I went ahead and looped the line for the power steering pump back to itself until I can figure out a belt situation where I can remove that. on these motor mounts. I'm gonna go ahead and put individual bolts. Okay, since I have the car to a point where it's pretty much just needs to be put back together, I'm gonna go ahead and focus my attention on the front clip. I'm gonna go ahead and remove all of this stuff. Your starter solenoid, like the starter solenoid, that needs to be removed. That relay needs to be removed, and then I can clean all of this up and then paint it. I don't want to have to mask all this off, so instead of spray painting it, I'm going to take a brush, and then I got a can of Rust Stop that I've used to paint a trailer, and I'm just going to brush all that on. It's going to look better than all this brown, but I think this is actually brown primer. I'm not sure.
Are you supposed to be up?
I didn't measure any of this, so I don't know if it's gonna fit.
So what am I doing?
This way.
Yeah, but what do I need to do to lay it down? Just tell me the motion I'm supposed to do.
I think we're supposed to pick it up like this.
Like in the
I got mine.
Alright, let me do this.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Oh, look, it's barely have to trim right here. Matter of fact, I think this is running right here too. It's tight, but thank you. I'll just take my saw. Looks like we got some fitment issues. I can't put the front clip all the way back because headers are touching right here, and then the pulley for the power steering, which I don't even need power steering, is hitting right here. That's where my battery goes. I guess I'll just take my Sawzall, I'll cut this out, and then take my grind, or my saw, yeah, right here there's a lip, so I'll cut right here, and then I'll probably unbolt this, just remove this completely, and then we should be good. Everything else looks clear. So I went ahead and cut the battery tray out, touch up painted it, and then right here on the inner fender well, I took it off, and then I cut that. This whole piece comes off, this little section, and then I cut it right there by the headers to give me enough clearance, and then I touched up painted it, and then I took some Rust-Oleum, a gallon of Rust-Oleum, and I just took a paintbrush and I painted everything right here. Just scuffed it with some 220 and hit it. I figure if I got it all apart, might as well. I'm gonna go ahead and try to get the engine to at least fire up for a little bit. I need to replace these battery terminals, and then I got some 10W30 oil, Supertech, got a Mobile One filter. So I'll go ahead and throw the filter on, the oil in, and then we'll check our homemade cut dipstick to see if it's working properly. All right, so I have the battery mocked in. We got a big problem with the power steering. I need to get rid of this power steering pump because it's all in my way of the battery. I don't want to run it for too long because I don't have a radiator and I don't have the trans lines hooked up. So I'm just gonna see if I can get it to fire up. And I have the fuel pump that came off of the 6-cylinder, just an electric pump.
for leaks. My oil pressure gauge maxed out. So I know with that 6-cylinder, I'm using the factory original oil pressure gauge, and it was reading on the higher end, but I mean, as soon as it idled for a second, it shot straight up. So I got really good oil pressure. This engine sounds really good. Yeah, I think we're good to go. We can go ahead and move forward. So I'm gonna go ahead and mock the radiator in and see what I need to cut. Because I know for sure, the radiator that I bought came from it was for a 1955 Chevy. Was supposed to be able to bolt straight in. The mounts are different and it's a little bit taller. So I think I'm gonna have to cut this section out for it to be able to drop in. And then I actually have an electric fan because I didn't want to have to cut the firewall, and I can gain a couple extra horsepower. I probably like, you know, 5 or 6 horsepower, but still electric fan's quieter, and then and it'll give me a space because I got a 3-core radiator, so it's going to be sitting out pretty far. So I'm going to go ahead and get that mocked in and show you guys what I come up with. I bought a 3-core. It's probably a little too big. Or I probably should have went with a smaller one, is what I mean. But for a 1955 bolt-on radiator, aluminum radiator, they wanted like $400 something. I bought this aftermarket Chevy one. Can't remember what I paid for it, $180 or something. So saved like 220 bucks. I think that's worth it. I'm gonna need to do some cutting. I'll go ahead and grab my saw. I got the radiator installed, got the hoses put on, and I was actually able to use the factory original 1995 Dodge Ram hoses. They were just like really long, so I just cut them short. You can see the bottom hose down there. It was a little finicky, had to kind of fight it a little tiny bit, but it's on there tight and it's at the right angle. Probably need to replace them because they were sitting for 10 years, but I got the radiator bolted in. And what I did was I went ahead and just put 2 bolts in it. I welded little tabs on there, stuck 2 bolts in there. With those 2 bolts and the 2 hoses on there, it ain't going nowhere. I mean, I've seen motors sitting there running just with the radiator connected. It ain't going nowhere. The fan, I got it clipped on there, and then what I need to do is I need to go ahead and wire it. There's a relay, and then there's a sensor that plugs into the intake where it detects the temperature of the water, and then once it gets to a certain temp, it kicks the fan on. And I'm gonna leave that hot all the time. That way when you shut the car off, the fan will keep running, and then once the temp is cool, it'll just shut off. Instead of, you know, once I turn my key off, it'll just, the temperature will rise. I don't know, that's what I was thinking. And it would kind of be cool because when I turn my car off, the fan will keep running, so it'll kind of sound kind of trick, like turn the car off and you hear the fan blowing. I'm gonna go ahead and top the radiator off with fill the radiator up with water, and then go ahead and start wiring the fan. Unfortunately, I got a big problem. The HEI distributor that I bought, the Chinese pieces, you know what? It's broken. The car will start up, it'll run, and it'll act like I'm like cycling the key on and off real fast. It'll die on. So I'll show you guys what it's doing. If you're ever thinking about buying one of those Chinese $50 distributors for the small block Mopars, do not do it. I ordered a points distributor from Rock Auto, and it was the same price. It's a single points distributor. I just don't see a point in the dual point because I'm not really going to be hot rodding this thing much.
Not even gonna fool with it. It's like losing connection. So that'll be it for part 2. Stay tuned for part 3. On part 3, I'm gonna go ahead and bleed all the brakes, send it off to the muffler shop, get a muffler put on it, probably replace the transmission filter and a bunch of other stuff. So thanks for watching, and remember, if an idiot like me can do something like this, you can too.